Okay, thank you for joining us for episode 4 of an interview with series. Today we have Kim Stolfer with us, joining us who's the president of Firearm Owners Against Crime. So Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself, your organisation, and why you got involved in the political fight to defend the right to keep and bear arms.
Well, like you, Nigel, I'm a veteran, United States Marine Corps, and as I developed past my military service, I saw what I perceived to be his problems in our society. From the perspective of some in government were willing to predicate the rights of all citizens on the misdeeds of others, which is a turnabout on the ear of what constitutional rights are supposed to be, because in a representative republic, especially when you swear an oath to support and defend it, you come away with a different perspective. And I did. And I didn't like what was going on. I thought that they were betraying the losses my friends in the military went through. And I felt that it was necessary to get involved. I started with national organizations and they left me wanting. So over a period of time and helping to write legislation, it became evident to me that for any true debate on this issue, we were going to have to bring it to the people. And so we started a grassroots organization, Firearms Owners Against Crime. And we decided we were going to try to educate legislators and get the average citizen involved. And I think despite fits and starts, we've managed to be able to be quite effective in garnering a reputation in Harrisburg and even with federal legislators that we're not only a force to be reckoned with, but these issues need a more serious treatment than we're seeing in the mainstream media.
I agree, and thank you for that. Okay, we'll move straight into the questions. Now, if you read the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, and that protects both Democrats and Republicans equally, why do so many people not understand the words "shall not be infringed," which is in the US Constitution, or "shall not be questioned," which is in the Commonwealth Constitution of Pennsylvania, Article 1, Section 21?
You know, that's an interesting question because it's much more complicated than people would give it credit for. I say that because there is a lack of understanding beginning in our society for the last 60 years as to what the Bill of Rights actually means. And our media has painted the concept of the ends justify the means as a reason why we can water down or eliminate certain rights that they don't agree with. Although I would mention that the First Amendment is always held up as sacrosanct, while the Second Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, and others are pretty much willing to be bartered with, depending on the flavor of the day in the prosecutor's office or some bureaucrat that doesn't have any connections to these things. So I would say that when it comes to what the wording of shall not be infringed in the U.S. Constitution, Second Amendment, and shall not be questioned in Article 1, Section 21 in PA's Constitution means, and I would also mention that the Second Amendment in the Pennsylvania came from Pennsylvania's right to bear arms. It's clear in the Heller decision that the Pennsylvania right to bear arms is not only stronger, but predates the Second Amendment, and yet we've had the same watering down effect. And it goes to the common thread throughout society where citizens aren't taught what rights are about. They're not taught really from grade school on up to believe in the importance of protecting those rights, because that is the essential spine of a nation. The limitation of the powers of government, that's something that was unique and unheard of in the entire world, of having a document that limited the powers of government and described specific powers that they had because they came from the people. So when you look at it that way, and then there's an attitude where people don't really pay close attention to the judicial branch. And one of the things that really amazes people is if I'm doing a presentation and I ask them, have you ever read the Constitution? And some people would say yes. And I said, what about the annotated Constitution? And they said, what's that? I said, well, you've seen the regular Constitution. It fits in a little handbook. The annotated Constitution is bigger than the King James Bible because it's over 2,000 pages. And all of that, those additions are annotations that come from the judicial system. And if you read any of the writings of the Founding Fathers, you'll see that the one thing that they dropped the ball on was not recognizing how tyrannical the courts have become. And if you look at recently what's happened, U.S. Supreme Court has denied 10 legitimate challenges to wrongful interpretations of the Second Amendment in June. It just happened. And this has happened for decades and decades, and I would say probably over a century, going back from the 1934 National Firearms Act. It's the same thing. And the courts are at the heart of this debate about what do freedoms mean, because the freedoms don't come from the courts. The courts are supposed to protect those freedoms from encroachment by the legislature. But what they've become is the God and jury of everything related to freedom from their own viewpoint. And that's wrong. And that's part of the reason why people don't take this seriously, because they really don't consider that freedom is an essential element of an American's way of thinking and an American's life. And if we don't start, we're going to find out that what's happening in Portland is only the tip of the iceberg.
I agree that the judiciary branches are becoming more political on their decisions and the way they interpret the law. Do you have a solution for that?
Probably the best solution would be to, one, have people say or talk to their legislators and say that we have to remove the lifetime appointment at the federal courts. Two, that's at the federal level. If we also need a mechanism for removing those judges. For instance, Justice Roberts, who just infuriated many conservatives because he even voted against and with the liberal minority on the court about churches being able to open in the coronavirus situation. Meanwhile, you can walk into Walmart, but you can't walk into a church and pray. So first thing you got to do is we have to build into accountability to government, and we have to layer it. And it goes for the federal or the state courts as well. Right now, a judge is elected for a 10-year term in Pennsylvania, but you don't know what their record is. So in keeping with that, how do you find it out? Well, you either have to invest a whole team and perhaps hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to pick out those cases that are bad. But why should they be? If you can pick out a gun owner who has registered a certain gun with the state police, you know, that invisible database they say they don't have. But if you can do that, why not judges? So what I propose is something that years ago a representative introduced for Firearms Owners Against Crime. It's a bill that would provide, and that was by Representative Kurt Schroeder, by the way. It's a bill that would provide for a way of tracking judicial decisions. And it would be entered in. The framework already exists. The Pennsylvania Judicial Portal is already there. I've talked to the man that manages that for the state. He said it would just take addition of a couple of fields and flip a switch, and it'd be ready to go. And we could go in and put in, for instance, Judge Manning, and we could put in Title 18 and Crimes Code or whatever, and we would be able to track the decisions he's made, whether he's forced a decision, the sentences were put concurrently instead of consecutively. So the way to make government better is to provide for more transparency and more accountability. And that's the real ultimate solution. We have to stop believing in bureaucrats and holding them accountable, just like all of us are held accountable, from traffic tickets and parking tickets all the way up to first-degree murder. In many cases, there should be a bureaucratic equivalent. Consider some of the people in office, what they do in office.
Okay. We're going to move on because we have a lot of questions today. Moms demand action. Every town for gun safety. The list goes on and on. They all attack the Second Amendment and focus on getting rid of firearms, thinking that it will solve all their problems. I can attest personally that in 1997, in the United Kingdom, when it lost its firearm rights, crime did not go down. The public were lied to, and misled, and now crime is out of control. Years after the confiscation, my parents were robbed in their home. I've got 2 brothers, and they've both been mugged in the UK. The people in these groups are good people, but they're misled of the real problems and solutions. The agenda of their leaders is not to solve the issues, but to get rid of firearms and the Second Amendment. What should members of these groups do and be demanding from their leaders to help solve the problems? And can we identify what the problems and issues are?
That's a very layered and multifaceted series of questions. So let's go over it piece by piece.
Okay.
First of all, Moms Demand Action, Ceasefire PA, Everytown, those groups are all funded by billionaires. I've been doing this a long time. And in the process of doing that, I think it's good to look at this historically. In America, around 2005, all of the anti-gun groups were collapsing. I mean, they didn't have support. They didn't have funding. Brady campaign was dying. And what happened? In stepped Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire. In stepped Bill Gates, his partner, too. Numerous billionaires stepped up to the plate and started funding them. Hollywood jumped in because they were about to die. Now what we're facing is a leviathan of over $100 million a year is being pumped into anti-gun efforts. So before we go any further, I think we need to look at why that's happening. So I'm going to throw that out there and let you chew on that for a while, because it's not meant to make society safer. Think about this. Transforming American society is what this is all about. From a rights-based society to one that can be manipulated with slick, fancy packaged arguments. And by the way, these groups are all hiring members of the psychological warfare components in the military when they come out of the military at very high salaries because Americans are being lied to. So let's talk about England for a moment, because England's held up as this so-called panacea or oasis of freedom or oasis of safety, which it isn't. And you know darn well.
It isn't. No.
You know this personally. But let's look at what happened, because this is a common thread running through crime and everything in America related to violence. In England in 1996 in the Dunblane incident, what happened was you had a monster who was approved to get guns who shouldn't have been. He murdered dozens of people. But it was because of a government malfunction. Did they fix government? No. They reached out to good, honest, hardworking English citizens, and they said, we're going to take your rights. Because of what this man did, we can't trust you either, because it's a matter of trust. The Constitution in America was put in place just like the Magna Carta was, because the same concepts of the Magna Carta were transcribed almost into the debates in 1776 and 1775 in America. But yet the English, through the manipulation of the media and the public discourse, lost the right to bear arms. And that was something, actually, interestingly enough, in England, prior to the Dunblane incident, and the crime rate in England was going down. And right after the seizure or confiscation or tyrannical government, I would say, the bent that they went on to go after lawful citizens' ownership of firearms in England, the crime rate skyrocketed. But what was the other connection? The media, I drive the media nuts when I talk about this, because I'm able to connect the continuity, if you will, between government coming after rights. And in the year 2000, what did they start doing, the British government? They were putting monitors in every newsroom, every TV studio. And now anything that comes on the air is supposed to be approved by government monitors.
Yep.
Now that was the First Amendment. And to this date, I've been on TV, I've been on radio, I've done debates open publicly. I've been up against other media people, and the one thing they've never been able to do and been unwilling to face is that this really happened. Because we have documents about that, articles where they wrote about it. So when you look at that in the context of what's really under attack, it's not violence in society. 90% of the violence in American society, and I'd be willing to bet in English society, is directly tied to the malfeasance of government to do the job they have before them with the laws they have in place. So, do these anti-gun groups have any legitimacy? Not a single drop, not a single iota. I've debated them. They won't debate me on TV anymore. The local TV stations can't find one of them with the guts necessary to come on TV or radio with me anymore. Because I'm willing to ask them what they're doing.
Well, let's hope some of them watch this and then decide that they want to do that. But we're going to move on to the next question. Approximately how many lives are saved each year, or day even, in Pennsylvania by legal firearm owners? Do we have any figures on that?
Well, we have studies that have shown the national rate, and we can sort of transcribe that into Pennsylvania, and it's thousands. Okay, and I'll go back. There's a researcher called Dr. Gary Kleck. He came out with Firearms and Crime back in 1993, and it was a transformative study. And basically it said it was 2.5 million people per year. Save their lives. And in 99% of the cases, the guns are never fired. Because if a bad guy wants to commit a crime and you present a firearm, he's obviously thinking, I made the wrong career choice with this one. And they run, which is fine. Nobody really wants to kill another human being. But at the same time, the media and the public debate, and many legislators even, when I talk to them, they have no concept of the vast numbers of people that are defended with firearms every year, not only in Pennsylvania, but across America. Well, maybe not so much in New York City or Los Angeles, but and that's been part of the underwhelming coverage about these issues. And it's a really good question, Nigel, because it's one that needs to be asked. So how do you calculate these? Well, first of all, I talked earlier about transparency in government. Why don't we require police officers, require the compilation of data? If you ever look at criminal reports, here's an example. You want to see the malfeasance in the way they do this? If you were to defend yourself with a firearm, a crime report would be written up, and you would be listed as the perpetrator. And it's all coding. And what the police departments and the district attorney's office do not do is, once it's determined that it was a legitimate self-defense situation, you produced the firearm, you were proper in its use, they never go back and change it from a 1 to a 4. It's that simple. And here we go, because, see, if they release those records properly to citizens, we as an organization could go in there and say, hey, government, you screwed up. You're not doing this properly. But that's not what happens. And then the media takes this and they ignore all of those incidents because they never take the next step. If we took the next step, we would encourage people to defend themselves. And here's another lie. The media doesn't cover armed citizen reports. Many times I find an article, if I do a Boolean search on the web, I'll find an article that's in like the Johnston Daily Times. Okay? And it's buried. It's a little like one paragraph. Where is the giant human interest story of a person that finally felt that they needed to protect themselves, to carry a gun for self-defense? Why do we not use those concepts in the media? Because they don't want to promote it. They got this attitude that we're going to promote vigilantism. So, as I've said before, it's an extensive conversation for a very, very complicated subject.
Well, actually, that leads us nicely into the next question. The media has full command of the narrative and has decided that if you own an AR-15 and wear any type of military clothing in public, then you are a white supremacist and racist. I own an AR-15. It's my preferred weapon of home defence. I have military clothing. I served in the military. I'm not a racist or a white supremacist. How do we break this sort of mind control?
It's easier than you think. And you're right. They portray average citizens. They create the narrative. And they do that to try to bias the public, the vast majority in the middle. Now remember, we have about 40% of citizens that own firearms. And there's only about 3% of the remainder that actually don't agree with the ownership of firearms, which is fine if they don't want to. But they cross the line, that threshold, when they say everybody else can't have them because we're stupid about things. And I'm not going to avoid the issue. They're stupid, they're ignorant, and they're arrogant. But how do we change that? The fact of the matter is, dealing with the media is surprisingly easy. I'll give you a technique. The FCC has an FCC book in every radio and TV station, because those are the ones that have the most immediacy, the most touchy-feely outreach, okay? Well, if you don't like something you see on TV, do what I've done repeatedly. Take a half a day off, go down to the station, tell them you want to see the FCC book because you want to write a complaint. By the way, it looks like a giant Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings book. Every one I've seen is a big green thing that's huge. It's just huge. It's enormous. Okay? And I guarantee you, by the way, that book has to be produced upon request because that book is provided by the FCC that they examine every year for a renewal of a broadcasting license. And that's one really easy way. You go in, you write your complaint in there. You're going to have vice presidents come out, offer you coffee, tea. It's happened to me dozens and dozens of times all across Pennsylvania. You want to get your point across, you've got to start there. You've got to challenge them, the legitimacy. Because remember, the FCC tells the stations that they broadcast at the pleasure of who? You and me. That's an American broadcasting license. So hold them accountable. I'm not one that shrinks from looking somebody in the eye and say, hey, bucko, you screwed up. And that's what we need to do. How do you hold them accountable? Most people, here's another one. Most people read local newspapers. Not the big ones like the Post-Gazette, the Voice of Moscow, that's what we call it, or the New York Times, which I think is really got Vladimir Putin as a contributing editor. But no, you read the local newspapers because it's a community newspaper. Remember, Tip O'Neill, former Congressman Tip O'Neill said something that if you remember nothing of what I'm saying, remember this. He said a long time ago, back in the early 90s, all politics is local. All politics is local. And that's something you need to understand because that permeates every part of our society. So go to your local newspaper and write up your thoughts. You'll get a 600 or 700 word op-ed in your local newspaper because they're desperate for content, where you won't get a 200 word letter to the editor. Convey your thoughts. You would be surprised. I talk to people all the time, and they're surprised that there's other people out there thinking like them. I was just at the pharmacy picking up some medicine, and it was an 85-year-old Navy veteran. He's sitting across from me, and he saw my hat. It said Firearms Owners Against Crime. He said, "What's that?" And I explained it to him. The first words out of his mouth was, "God bless you, son. God bless you." I was at a local hardware store, and I was open carrying. Sometimes I do that so I can elicit comments. And this young man was with his father. He looked to be about 11, 12 years old. And he was fixated on my 45 on my hip. And his dad sees that and sees what his son was interested in. And I was talking to his son because I was waiting in line in customer service. And the dad says, "Is that legal?" I said, "Absolutely, it's legal. It's your right. That's what I fought for in the Marine Corps." He was a 20-year Coast Guard veteran. 20 years. And he didn't know the law. So I think the general ignorance among society is something we have to cure. And we have to talk to others and promote the concepts. And by challenging the media, writing your letters to the editor, and holding them accountable, we can put that genie back in the bottle, if you will.
Okay, some good points there. I'd like to move on to law enforcement. In Pennsylvania, we have state police, local police, and the sheriff department. What can you say about each of these? And shouldn't they be following the law of the land and the United States Constitution and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Constitution, instead of what they are told or feel they should do when it comes to firearms?
Technically, you're right. They should be following the law of the land. But what is the law of the land? Is it the original constitutions, or is it the ones annotated by the judicial system? That's why I talked earlier about the tyranny of the courts. There's actually a book you can look online at Barnes & Noble and Amazon and others. Look up Tyranny of the Courts. There's a number of books written about that concept. So back to law enforcement. Should they be following the law of the land? Yes. Do they swear an oath? Yes, they do. However, their oath is a little different. It's not as strong as the one that our military took, the one that you and I believe in. So when we have a situation where law enforcement is confronted with a general lack of knowledge about what the law is, the legality of it, what I found there's kind of a breakdown in law enforcement. And I do it by time of service. If you get a police officer who has, and this is generic, it may be different, with exceptions to the rule, but it's kind of like a little bit of a loosely kept rule in my eyes. From about 1 to 5 years in law enforcement, you pretty much come out of, I call it cop school. It's where you become certified to be a police officer, but that's what I call it. You come out with an attitude that's something similar to know all, be all, government's right. Okay? After about 5 years, you run into police officers that have learned what happens in the courts, the plea bargain. I mean, imagine yourself. Okay, I'll get into that. But from about 5 years on, they know what it's like on the streets. They know what laws are right and what laws are wrong. Many times, those kind of guys will give you a break, especially if you treat them right. And by treat them right, I don't mean don't throw rocks and bombs and stuff at them like you're doing in Portland, okay? I mean, these guys work for a living, too. They want to go home at the end of the shift. And if you really want to get an eye-opening experience in the law enforcement, do a ride-along with a police officer, especially in a suburban or urban force. My God, you will get a totally different perspective. And another question you should be asking is, why don't legislators do ride-alongs with law enforcement? What are they afraid of? Any legislator who criticizes law enforcement should be going with them and seeing what they face every day. So should they be following the law of the land? Technically, yes. Do citizens? Do we as a society? Do we show up at council meetings or supervisor meetings, committee meetings? How many people have actually gone to a school board meeting or a meeting of their own township and find out what's going on? The police chief's going to be there. I'm going to give you a little example. There was a PennDOT engineer in my township of South Fayette Township, and I'm not going to shade him. I'm just not going to name him. He wanted to take and have a no discharge ordinance for my township. Why? Because he moved into a home where there was a pre-existing 80-year farming land, a farming family that had about 80 acres near this community that just got built up. And on one Sunday a month, they would go out with friends and they would throw trap birds, those little clay birds, and shoot shotguns for a couple hours. And I know this because they're only about a quarter of a mile from my house. So I went down to South Fayette Township because the commissioner asked me to come down, and I was listening to this debate. And they wanted to pass this law, even though the complaint was noise and these other things. But many people, you'll hear somebody propose a law, and we come to the limited mental thought that there has to be something because there isn't anything on the books. Couldn't be further from the truth. Fact is, we do have laws, many laws. And in Pennsylvania, there's one called disorderly conduct. If you're doing something wrong, there's a summary charge, much like a traffic ticket, or a criminal charge like a misdemeanor 1. Okay, so I turned around and the police chief was sitting behind me when I was making my presentation telling them we don't need these laws. Now, granted, this would affect every person in the township, which was about 62,000 people from what I understand at the time. And I turned around to the police chief and I said, Chief, because I knew him. I said, have you charged anybody with disorderly conduct? He goes, no. I said, could you if it was a problem? He goes, yes. I looked at counsel and I said this. Now, luckily, I'm a president of an organization, which gives me a little bit bigger of a hammer to hit, because I play whack-a-mole all the time. You know that game with kids? Boom, 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 when they stick their head up? That's what I do with politicians. Okay? So what I said to the council then, is I said, look, you don't need the laws. You got them in place. This man is clearly an ideologue. What's worse is he is on Pennsylvania state time because he worked for PennDOT, sending messages to abrogate the rights of citizens in these communities when he's not telling them to enforce the current laws. I said, so here's what's going to happen. You pass this law, we call our attorneys, we sue you, and then you lose in court. And then I think you should pass those legal costs along to this guy because he doesn't have any idea what he's talking about. Well, this guy got up and stormed out. So the moral of the story is this. Be willing to get involved. Stop bad things from happening by being informed. If you don't know, not only do you have it, you know what these things are, right? Telephones. Okay. You got the whole world at your fingertips. You can find the answers there, the law there. Just take a few moments, turn off an NFL game. They don't care about your rights. Okay. And go get involved with your politicians and the process. You'll be better for it, and your fellow citizens, your neighbors will respect you, and you'll have a sense of accomplishment. Because it's always fun to play whack-a-mole, especially when you win.
Okay. Well, this will be a two-part series, and we're getting close towards the end of part one. And we'll finish with this question for this series, and then we'll move into part two on another time. We often hear of preemption. Can you explain to our viewers what that is and why it is so important in Pennsylvania?
Firearms preemption laws are important, and they come from a context going back, beginning with the concepts that started with the 1968 Gun Control Act. 1968 Gun Control Act passed when a criminal actually had a firearm that he shouldn't have had and killed Robert F. Kennedy. And so what happened is they passed this law. By the way, the Gun Control Act of 1968 was law that was actually written word for word from the Nazi gun laws of the 30s. I have the translation. So everybody here should realize that American policy on guns originated with the Nazi gun laws. Anybody want to challenge me on that, call me up, drop me an email. I'd be happy to help. But on top of that, what happened with the 68 Gun Control Act was there was a deluge of legal cases going after every facet of gun ownership from the 70, 71, 72. In Pennsylvania, that happened at the state level too. So in 1974, the legislature put together a firearms preemption law and passed it. Why? Because the Constitution has something in it called equal protections. Equal protections mean you can't have a patchwork quilt of laws all across Pennsylvania. Like you can't own a revolver in this community or a semi-automatic in that community, or you can't carry or you can. People can't, they don't understand the current laws from the state, let alone a patchwork quilt of laws. So over the years, what happened was this law was in effect that said no local community, township, county, borough, whatever, can in any way pass a law that infringes upon the right to bear arms. Possession, transfer, whatever. So by doing that, what they did is they reserved that power to the state. But what's been going on now, and in arguably about 108 communities across Pennsylvania, still to this day, because I'm working on that now, is that local communities have laws or ordinances in place that don't let you carry in parks and local places, and we're slowly suing them. We won in Lower Merion Township. We've got Harrisburg and Pittsburgh because they're violating preemption. It's important to note that this is a crime. This is a crime in Pennsylvania law, which means it's a misdemeanor one crime for anybody in government to pass these kind of laws. Problem we're having is the enforcement, and that's why we're working on legislation to try and make that stronger, which I believe is House Bill 1076 or Senate Bill 531, currently in the current session. So preemption law stops a bureaucrat from passing a law and saying, you can't have this widget on this property or here, and if we do, we're going to seize it, we're going to take it, we're going to confiscate it, we're going to sell it, we're going to put you in jail or fine you. Ironically, most of the local laws are only about up to $1,000 in costs and 90 days up in jail. But how many of us could hold a job if we were gone for 90 days? Basically what this is, these local communities doing this is a form of mafia rule, extortion. This is government using its power to bludgeon citizens against exercising their rights lawfully. And in my opinion, like you said earlier, the right to bear arms shall not be questioned. We've got to get back to those roots. So hope that explains preemption.
Thank you. Okay, well, I want to thank you for coming in today, Kim. Online, of course. I can't go into the studio and because of all the COVID regulations and what have you. And if you want to stay tuned for part 2, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And we'll have some action-packed questions delving into this and some of the solutions for part 2. Thank you again, Kim, for coming in today.
Semper Fidelis.